To start with, the truncated training period that they'll undergo, plus the truncated service liability that an Agniveer will have, will definitely mark them out as different kind of soldiers in any combat unit. And that kind of thing will remain at the back of everybody's mind, including the commanding officer and the other soldiers. So the employment will be restricted, and people will have to think twice about employing an Agniveer, given that his training has been relatively much shorter, and he's due to leave in a few years' time. So those factors will certainly play on the minds of people with whom he's serving and under whom he's likely to serve. The armed forces and the military are not a laboratory for social engineering or social reform and things like that. Uh, and war is too serious a business for that kind of distraction. The sole role of the military is to defend the country, fight wars, and win them. So anything that you do to the military should be measured against only one yardstick. Will this change enhance my combat capability, or will it affect or degrade or whatever it is? And if the answer is no or maybe, then perhaps it is not worth taking the risk, because as I said, the military is not meant to bring about social reform or provide adventure or inculcate patriotism in the youth of the country.
Let me put it like this. Audiences listening to you, lay audiences, will have got the firm impression from everything you said up till now that the Agnipath scheme does not enhance, it degrades combat effectiveness. Is that the right impression they've got?
Yes, Agnipath scheme in its present form does all that.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Today we focus on the controversy surrounding the Agnipath scheme. Are Agniveers the same as regular Jawans, or are there key differences between them? And is the Agnipath scheme imperfect and flawed, as some of its critics have suggested? Those are the two main issues I shall raise today with the former Chief of Naval Staff and former Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, Admiral Arun Prakash. Admiral Prakash, let's start with the issue that's brought Agniveers into the news before we widen our discussion and talk about the Agnipath concept. Other than the fact that 75% of Agniveers only serve for 4 years, what are the other significant differences between Agniveers and regular Jawans?
Well, to start with, the truncated training period that they'll undergo, plus the truncated service liability that an Agniveer will have, will definitely mark them out as different kind of soldiers in any combat unit. And that kind of thing will remain at the back of everybody's mind, including the commanding officer and the other soldiers. So the employment will be restricted, and people will have to think twice about employing an Agniveer, given that his training has been relatively much shorter, and he's due to leave in a few years' time. So those factors will certainly play on the minds of people with whom he's serving and under whom he's likely to serve.
Now, I believe Agniveers don't have a rank. They wear a badge identifying them as Agniveers, and after leaving service, they don't receive a pension and gratuity. They don't have access to medical and canteen facilities, and if they die in service, their children's education is not paid for. Doesn't that mean that in a very real, credible sense, we have two different types of Jawans?
Yes, we do. And that's the nature of the beast, because all services in many countries have this kind of entry, both for officers and for men. You have short service commission, you have emergency commission, you have hostilities only recruits, and they are taken in for a specific purpose, that they will fill in vacancies. They will serve for a short time without imposing a pension liability or other liability on the service, and then they are put outside the service. So this is the nature of the beast, that there will be some discrimination, and that's understood both by the person who joins and the service at large. There's nothing new about this.
Absolutely, except in India, We tend to believe that Agniveers are regular soldiers, but you pointed out that training is less, the length of service is less, and there will be a clear distinction both in the minds of Agniveers and regular Jawans that the two are different.
Yes, you're right. I think we should have been far more conscious of the cultural implications of this kind of recruitment, because in India, it's been pointed out by many observers that a soldier in a village can transform the future of his family, his whole next few generations. So a job in the army or navy or air force is considered a lifetime job with its related implications. So if you take away the benefits that have been taken for granted for for decades in a Indian milieu, it's going to have social implications. I think that's a fact that we failed to recognize and acknowledge, and that's having its consequences now.
Let's come at this point, Admiral Prakash, to the case of Ajay Kumar, an Agniveer who died in service this January. So far, his family has received 98 lakhs, which is insurance payment from a bank and also from an army group insurance scheme. Is that the same as the ex gratia payment due to him from the army?
No, the ex gratia is something quite separate, which comes from the army, from the government. What he's received at the moment are insurance policies which have matured with a bank and with a group insurance scheme. These are quite distinct from the ex gratia which his family is supposed to receive.
So when Rahul Gandhi in Parliament said that even 6 months after his death, Ajay Kumar's family has not received any ex gratia from the government, Rahul Gandhi was right.
I'm not sure what Rahul Gandhi said. I haven't read or heard, but it's out in the newspaper, in the media, that he has not received the ex gratia so far. And 6 months have elapsed. And this is something quite unusual, because a death in a combat unit is taken very seriously by the CO downwards. People go to great lengths to go and meet the family, ensure that all benefits that are due to them have been received. So this is a very unusual situation. I don't know why it's happened. Maybe it's either the bureaucracy, defense finance bureaucracy, or perhaps the rules and regulations as far as Agniveers are concerned are not yet clear to everyone concerned. Otherwise, it shouldn't take more than a few weeks for every single benefit to reach the bereaved family. It's most unusual.
You're making a very important point there, Admiral Prakash. You're saying a delay of 6 months is very unusual. Normally, the death benefits are handed over to the bereaved family within a matter of weeks. So this is an unusual, exceptional delay.
Yes, it is. As I said, generally an officer or a JCO or some warrant officer from the unit will go to the family and deliver the benefits as far as possible. So for a delay of 6 months, something has obviously gone wrong seriously somewhere in the
What
world.
you're saying is what would happen if it had been a regular Jawan who died in service.
Yes, I'm sure that within a matter of weeks, whatever needed to be done would be done, and all sorts of help rendered to the bereaved family. That's the custom in all three services.
The interesting thing is that on the floor of the Lok Sabha, when Rahul Gandhi publicly and forcefully said that Ajay Kumar's family has not received ex gratia payment, even though 6 months have passed since his death, the Defense Minister Rajnath Singh contradicted that. He stood up and interrupted Rahul Gandhi to contradict it, claiming that 98 lakhs has been paid. A statement issued after that by the army confirms that the ex gratia has not been paid. I'll quote that statement. It says, ex gratia and other benefits amounting to approximately 67 lakhs, as applicable according to the provisions of the Agnipath scheme, will be paid on final account settlement shortly post due verification. So the army is clearly saying that up till now, insurance money has been paid, but the ex gratia has not. And that, I take it, is obviously the final word on the subject.
Yes, it is, and it shows that there is some confusion, some lack of clarity on how to proceed. This is perhaps one of the first instances where an Agniveer has died in action, and his dues have been held up. So perhaps some bureaucracy needs to be untangled, and surely the Raksha Mantri should have been given more authentic information. Having said all that, it's something one should note, that the family is not in any financial distress. That's something encouraging, that a certain amount of money has been delivered to them. It's sad that the full dues haven't reached them yet, but I'm happy to see that they've received some financial relief at this moment.
Would you agree that this lack of clarity, as you called it, this confusion, as you called it, is unfortunate?
Indeed, it is. Such a thing should never happen. I mean, a battle casualty should be, the relatives, the next of kin must be looked after as soon as possible.
Let's at this point, Admiral Prakash, widen our discussion. In an article you wrote for the Indian Express in June 2022, you pointed out that the Agnipath scheme is not suitable for the Navy. You wrote, and I'm quoting from that article, such a scheme in its present form is suitable only for the Army, whose large infantry component is not excessively burdened with technology. In the case of the Navy and Air Force, you added, it must be recognized that at least 5-6 years are required before a new entrant can acquire hands-on experience to be entrusted with the operation or maintenance of lethal weapon systems and complex machinery and electronics. So clearly, 4 years is not adequate to train a naval recruit. And yet at the end of 4 years, the Agniveer has left service. So he'll never be adequately trained as far as the Navy is concerned.
Well, yes. To start with, 6 months. I mean, to my mind, I mean, whatever I know, things must have changed since I left the Navy. But 6 months is not enough to enable a young recruit who walks into the Navy to actually put his hands on any piece of equipment. A young sailor in the Navy is entrusted either with a weapon, could be a gun or a missile, a sensor, which is a radar or a sonar, or a piece of machinery, a generator or whatever. Now, all of these are complicated, complex systems, and any mishandling or negligence can not only result in casualties but immense combat reduction. So one is very careful. At least in my time, this was the thing, that you train a person, and give him basic training in the training academy, which is just physical fitness, elements of discipline, and so on. And then he goes to a professional school where he's taught about equipment. Then he joins a unit, whether it's a ship or a air squadron, where he's given what is known as on-the-job training under the supervision of a experienced person. He does his on-the-job training for a few months or whatever. And then when he's deemed competent to be allowed to approach a piece of equipment, then he's given a brief test and certified, if possible, after an exam. Now, to my mind, in 2022, when I wrote this article, I could not visualize how a 6 months training will enable a young sailor to approach equipment usefully. And thereafter, if he's going to be, now there's only 3.5 years left, he's going to get leave, he's going to go on, various duties, etc. In the remaining period, perhaps his mind is also preoccupied on what happens when he lands up in CV Street. So will we have his full attention for the remaining period of service? So putting all these things together, it seemed to me at that point of time that 6 months training, 3.5 years of service are just not adequate to enable a recruit to contribute significantly in a combat unit.
In fact, as you wrote in that article of June 2022, you said it must be recognized that at least 5-6 years are required before a new entrant can acquire hands-on experience and be entrusted with the operation or maintenance of lethal weapon systems and complex machinery and electronics. 5-6 years is more than the entire 4-year service of an Agniveer.
Yes, so maybe if you're getting more intelligent and smarter people into the services, maybe you can reduce it to 3 or 4 years. But then you must utilize, once he's trained and proficient at his job, then you must keep him in the service for a few more years to contribute to his unit. So I would say 7, 8, maybe up to 10 years is perhaps more sensible than the present 4 years. So you train him, make him proficient, enable him to become a competent, and then use him for a few years, maybe up to a petty officer or a havildar or sergeant in the Air Force, and then let him go. You still have the same benefits. You don't have to give him a pension. You'll still make savings.
But you're suggesting that he should be retained for something like up to 10 years for it to make sense.
Yes, he should be trained more in detail and then retained for a further period and then let go.
I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Now, in a tweet you put out earlier this month, you said we need to look beyond the in-service disparities as well as the poor post-demobilization prospects of young Agniveers. Those are two issues we've already discussed. In that tweet, you then specifically asked, is anyone worried about the huge operational handicap imposed on combat units, forced to accept barely trained recruits fit only for sentry duties? First of all, you're clearly saying in that tweet that Agniveers are barely trained and only fit for sentry duties.
I've just said that after 6 months training, you really can't use even regular entry combatants who get the full training. When they join a combat unit, they're still given a bit of sentry duty to induct them into the service. Now this man or a woman who comes after 6 months training with just a 3.5 years tenure ahead of him will not be. I've just said that in detail. But let me go back a little. Why must we discriminate so much against people who join through this scheme? To deny them various other facilities which regular soldiers get, because that creates a division in the unit. So I think we should minimize the discrimination, extend the training period, extend the service tenure, and the rough edges of the scheme will get knocked off.
The thing that I want to repeat for the audience, because I think it will come as a surprise, if not a shock for ordinary Indians, is to realize that a former naval chief, a former chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, believes that Agniveers, after just 6 months training, are barely trained and only fit for sentry duties. That's not a point laymen have understood. You're bringing it home to them and it'll shock and shake them.
Well, that's my opinion. Perhaps people who are actually seeing them in action may differ. It's quite possible.
Now, secondly, and perhaps more importantly, what are the huge operational handicaps imposed on combat units? Can you explain that a little further, Admiral Prakash?
If we go back in time to the COVID period, for some reason, recruitment into the armed forces was suspended for 3 years. So people retired, went home, but nobody was taken in. So I presume that those 3 years resulted in a fair loss of manpower in the three services, and that's also the time that threats on our borders were sort of building up, both in the north and in the west. So at that particular time, now we demolished a recognized and smoothly working system of recruitment and training and replaced it all of a sudden, almost overnight, with a new system, untried system. And then the product of the system is now joining the combat units. So once again, to someone like me sitting outside the services without actually witnessing what's going on inside, to me, it seems that by doing all these things, by suspending recruitment, replacing the system by an untried system and inducting raw young people, men and women, into the armed forces, there will be a combat penalty to pay. And these young men and women are, as I said, are not given ranks. They wear a shoulder flash which says Agniveer. There is a bit of discrimination. So you put two people in the same trench, for example, an Agniveer and a regular soldier. There is a difference. I mean, in the motivation levels, in the kind of conduct and behavior that you'll find. So net result is that there will be a penalty to pay in terms of combat effectiveness of units for a few years.
Let me pick up on something you said when you talked about motivation levels being different between the Agniveer and a regular soldier, and how there's a sense of discrimination in the way they're treated in the facilities made available to them. Newspaper reports have also said that there are bonding and fraternity issues both between Agniveers and regular Jawans, but also between Agniveers themselves, because they're competing with each other to see what number get into that 25% that is retained. How much of a concern are these bonding and fraternity issues? Because I take it for the services, bonding and fraternity is key.
Yes, in theory, yes. Everything. I mean, if you go out on a patrol, if you serve on a ship or a submarine or an aircraft, teamwork, bonding, all these things matter, especially when things start going wrong or in action. The brunt will be felt by commanding officers, by junior leaders in the armed forces. I mean, I'm sitting outside for the last 15, 20 years. I really can't speak for them, but I can only visualize that when you create differences amongst combatants, there is bound to be a little bit of friction and loss of efficiency, combat efficiency, and you'll have to worry more about these kind of issues rather than sending people into action or crisis situations.
So this means esprit de corps, which is so important to the Army, Navy, and Air Force, could be undermined or at least reduced.
Yes, it could, and it is a distraction. And I would like to, measure it by how has this scheme enhanced combat effectiveness of the armed forces. I mean, that should have been the sole criteria for any new scheme, any change which you think about bringing in.
You raised this question of combat effectiveness. In fact, you had a tweet about it earlier this month as well. You said the sole litmus test for any change or reform in the military must be, and I'm quoting you, does it enhance or degrade combat effectiveness? I think I know the answer to the question I'm about to ask you, but nonetheless, for the sake of the audience, I'll ask it. In your eyes, does the Agnipath scheme enhance or degrade combat effectiveness?
Okay, let me answer it like this. I mean, the armed forces and the military are not a laboratory for social engineering or social reform and things like that. And war is too serious a business for that kind of distraction. The sole role of the military is to defend the country, fight wars, and win them. So anything that you do to the military should be measured against only one yardstick. Will this change enhance my combat capability, or will it affect or degrade or whatever it is? And if the answer is no or maybe, then perhaps it is not worth taking the risk, because as I said, the military is not meant to bring about social reform or provide adventure or inculcate patriotism in the youth of the country. There are other ways of doing it. There is the National Cadet Corps. There is a huge, there should have been a territorial army where you can do all these things. You can bring in citizens, bring in young people, train them, give them weapons training, inculcate patriotism, physical fitness, etc. But to do this to the actual military of the country, which is now, badly stretched, as you can see, things are happening every day on our borders. To fiddle with that system without actually measuring the impact on combat effectiveness, I think was a hasty step which should have been thought through more carefully.
Let me put it like this. Audiences listening to you, lay audiences, will have got the firm impression from everything you said up till now that the Agnipath scheme does not enhance, it degrades combat effectiveness. Is that the right impression they've got?
Yes, Agnipath scheme in its present form does all that. But yet we do need a scheme like this because, as has been mentioned continuously, the pay, pension, etc. going up. So you do need a scheme which will reduce this expenditure. And it could be a scheme like Agnipath, but with major changes to it. It could be a very effective way of cutting down manpower, reducing expenditure, and yet enhancing combat capability. You train them properly, you motivate them, give them a reason to serve under the colors, and you could have a good scheme in your hands.
You're talking of major changes. I'm using the exact words you used. An Agnipath scheme with major changes could be acceptable, could be necessary. Now, according to the Indian Express of the 13th of June, the government is considering increasing the years for service for Agniveers to 7. At the moment, it's only 4. Increasing the training period from the present 24 weeks to 42 weeks, and retaining up to 70% rather than just 25%. Are those sensible steps? And secondly, are they sufficient?
Yes, now having gone through whatever we have, with the social protests and other aspects, I think this is probably the right way to follow. Increase the 44 weeks is a good term for training. Extending it to 7 years, maybe even more, because before we came to our present system of color service of 15 years pensionable, there were other schemes, 7 years, and people went home without a pension. But and the second point is that why must we be so niggardly about giving benefits to them? They are serving the country. Give them all the benefits that a regular soldier gets. How much does it cost? A canteen is not a charity. They are paying to buy things which the funds go into for welfare, or giving them education. I mean, let's look at the American system. They passed the GI Bill after the war, which gave them many benefits in Civvy Street. Once they leave the service, they get education, they get many other benefits. And lastly, the best way of overcoming all these problems is to let the man serve in the armed forces and then transfer him laterally to the paramilitary forces, where everybody serves for 60 years. There'll be no unhappiness anywhere. The paramilitary forces will get a highly trained, motivated person to serve. The pension bill will be reduced. But in my experience, the paramilitary forces are run by the Home Ministry, which is far more powerful than the Defense Ministry. And they have stoutly resisted any such scheme. Now, I think 10% jobs are available in the paramilitary forces. Why not all Agniveer entrants into the armed forces transfer to the paramilitary forces, to the PSUs, to railways, to banks? There is a perfectly good solution to this conundrum, but we are not willing to tackle it. And all this should be mandated by an act of parliament.
My last question, Admiral Prakash. I'm talking about the Agnipath scheme as it was introduced in 2022, not about the changes the government is now considering to bring in. The original scheme was intended to be a response to the ballooning cost of defense pensions. And as the scheme originally existed, you're saying that was the wrong response to the problem. In your tweet, you said economics should take a back seat to national security. What happened was that economics seemed to be trumping national security.
Okay, national security means survival of the state. If your adversaries are able to twist your arm and make you do whatever you want, or occupy your territory, then what use is GDP? So my logic is that if you want to ensure national security, then the economists and the financial wizards should make sure that enough adequate resources are made available for national security. So now to say that we cannot buy military hardware, we cannot modernize our armed forces and mourn that our pension bill is too much. Why is your pension bill too much? It doesn't need rocket science to predict your pension bill. It will go up. It has to go up. You have DA raise every 6 months. You have pay commissions every 7 years. People are living longer. Basic economists could have predicted that in the year X, this will be our pension bill. To express surprise and to then add your pension and pay bill to your defense budget and then scream and shout that it's going beyond limits is, I think, illogical. So separate your pension and pay from your military modernization. If you think that national security needs it, then make the funds available for modernization. Don't link the two. Don't ask the armed forces to save money so that you can buy tanks and weapons. To me, at a very basic level, it sounds illogical.
And if you have to come up with an Agniveer scheme, think about it carefully. Think about the length of training carefully. Think about the length of service carefully. Think about the facilities that you give them carefully, because all of that, if you don't think about it carefully, could have a detrimental impact on your military.
Let me correct you, Karan. Think of any scheme, but give it a trial. Take a small section, take a pilot scheme, try it out for a year or so. If it works, wonderful. Apply it across the board. If it doesn't, then change it. But to do this to the whole military and then say, all right, we are going to step back is something I thought not very well thought out.
So it should have been first done as a trial.
Exactly. And a trial with the paramilitary forces, with the territorial army, anywhere else you could, or even earmark a few units in each service and say, all right, we'll try out Agniveers here and let's see what happens.
Admiral Prakash, I thank you very much for this comprehensive interview and for so openly and forcefully explaining to the country where the Agniveer scheme has gone wrong, the detrimental impact it could have if it is not immediately and seriously and majorly amended, and the cost to the country's Army, Navy, and Air Force of not doing so. I'm extremely grateful to you. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.